Hi everybody, I'm Matthew, and in today's video we have a Seiko 5 6119-8273 with an absolutely stunning blue dial. The day alignment is off a little bit. That's going to be the main focus of this video. I am going to go ahead and service the movement. We'll zip through that part of it and focus more on the day alignment. We'll get the case back off, and you don't necessarily need to remove the rotor and automatic works to do the work on the date wheel. I do find it easier to handle the movement when that's removed. And like I said, we're going to be servicing this watch, so this will need to come off anyway. But as far as doing the work on the date wheel, that's optional. I'm pressing down there on the stem release, and we'll remove the stem and flip this over to uncase it. And we'll pop our hands off with a little bit of plastic to protect the dial. And we'll loosen our dial feed screws, which are on the sides of this movement. With the dial is this little gray plastic ring. Note the spaces around the dial feet, and we'll put this away in a safe place. Next is this little C-clip that holds the day wheel in place. I've got a little sheet of plastic here to help prevent it from flying off, and I just gently pry with a very small screwdriver around the bottom and rotate it. Note that it's beveled on one side. You want the bevel down. That makes it easier to remove. If you put that bevel up, it makes it extremely hard to remove. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the balance. I mentioned that I'm going to be servicing this anyway. Even if we don't need to remove the balance to do the date wheel, it's not a bad idea since there is that little bit of risk of damage. If you're comfortable doing so, that's great. If you're not, then maybe you should leave it in there. And like a feverish dream induced by the magic of editing, we get the movement disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled to the point where we're ready to get the date wheel back on. I'm doing a little bit of mental gymnastics here. I'm blaming allergies, trying to figure out which way to rotate this the way, when you're looking at it versus when you flip it over. Really, I overcomplicated it, but just remember, just visualize it the way that it needs to turn and make sure you get it right, because you really want to make as few adjustments as possible. Let's move it off this casing pad onto this hard surface. I think it's going to be less likely to bend as I apply pressure to move this gear on the back of the disc here. Really, I want to move this as little as possible. I'm talking like maybe 3 degrees. I'd rather move it too little than too much. The fewer adjustments, the better. Hi, this is Editing Matthew, and I am jumping in here as I'm working on this video. I see that I really didn't do a very good job explaining nor showing the date wheel. I've got this old date wheel and some pegwood here to try and explain this a little better. Let's say we'll reference Sunday as our day. So we'll say Sunday is off maybe just a few degrees. What that needs to do is that Sunday needs to be rotated clockwise a few degrees. Well, that in turn means that this star wheel on the other side needs to be pivoted counterclockwise a few degrees, and that will get that Sunday in the position. So when you flip it over, just remember that's now reverse. So the star wheel would actually, since we're looking at it reversed, the star wheel would actually need to turn a few degrees clockwise. You really want to nudge this as little as possible. My goal is to push it and not even really think that I've moved it and check my alignment from there. And if this feels loose, you can add the tiniest bit of adhesive. I wouldn't use anything aggressive. So now back to incoherent me. It actually feels pretty tight, so it may not need any glue. Let's get this back on and check the alignment. Underneath the wheel is a little spring that has to engage with the underside of that disc. You can see it through the slots of that wheel, and you just take a little tool like that oiler and wrap that spring around, and it'll snap right into place. We're going to do a little test fit here with a spare dial just to minimize risk to that beautiful blue dial. And wow, I'll take that. That's dead on first try. So now we're going to get this little retaining clip on. Make sure that bevel edge is down. Just to press with the tweezers. Since we already had this fully disassembled, I went ahead and cleaned up the case. So I'm just going to put this minute track ring back inside. Get it aligned, and we'll get our gasket. This gasket is kind of L-shaped. Just want to get that pressed back into place right, so you don't damage it when you squeeze the crystal back in. This crystal isn't perfect, but it's serviceable. So we'll go ahead and get that in, and we'll get the bezel. I have some Rodico here to mark the spot where the cutaway is for where you use a tool to pry the bezel off. And we'll get this aligned and get it centered as much as possible so I can get as even pressure as possible. I'm going to be very cautious here. Don't want to break the crystal. Usually the bezel makes a nice pop sound, but I'm not getting that, so I was taking it very easy, but it looked like it was down all the way, and I was going to take it out and check it, and yeah, looks good. So now we'll get to the dial. So here's that little dial spacer, and remember it goes, those gaps go around where the dial feet go. There's also a cutout there for the area by the stem. Just want to be careful, make sure you have your dial feet aligned. You can bend those if you're sort of force that in there. You shouldn't have to force anything on a watch. And I'll tighten these dial feet screws down. A lot of Seikos have them on the bottom side instead of the sides. They don't require much pressure, just snug. And I'm going to clean up these hands just a little bit with some Rodico. Be careful not to get into the loom. It's a little something stubborn here. I'm going to use a little pegwood here to see if I can persuade it off. We'll line up our hour hand at the date change and check it. Make sure it sweeps over with enough clearance there. It's not quite parallel, so we'll take care of that. And now we'll clean up our minute hand a little bit. Note at the 2 o'clock marker is a little protrusion on the dial. That little tab lines up with the minute track ring inside the case. And if you don't have these aligned right, then it won't sit right in the case. So that's something I've seen overlooked when I've received watches. People have stuffed it back in there, not aligned right. So just watch out for that. So the gap is not in the case, it's in that minute track ring. So just getting that aligned and sliding it over. And we are getting really close. We'll drop this little spacer ring in place. I'm not sure why, but it seems like I struggle more to get these the Automatic Works bridge in place than I do the train bridges. That wasn't too bad.
Where was I supposed to bring it?
See if we can get these screws set without losing them deep in the bowels of the movement here. as I'm adding screws to a bridge that has multiple screws, I don't tighten them all the way down one by one. I like to kind of sort of get them soft set and then go back and tighten so it kind of distributes the load a little more evenly. Tilting this toward my light, now I can see that the paw lever isn't quite engaged around the wheel like it needs to be, so I'm gonna have to loosen the screws on this Automatic Works bridge enough to kind of get that paw lever, get enough space where I can move the paw lever back into place as it should be, and then I'll tighten that down and check that it's engaged properly. And now we're ready to put the rotor on. Don't let the little things frustrate you. You'll have projects or days sometimes where you're going to have to sort of backtrack, maybe even multiple times. One time I was working on a car, we had this thing stripped down to the manifold. Ductwork everywhere, rags stuffed all in there. Any part that debris could fall in there had rags stuffed in there. And we got it all back together hours and hours and hours later, and then I realized we had left some rags in there, so we had to disassemble it and reassemble it again. Anyway, that's it for this watch. We'll let it run for a day or two, and then we'll throw it on the time grapher. So hopefully we made it a little more consistent, and the day wheel looks much better. Let's get this exposure bumped up a little bit. Anyway, thanks again for joining, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, take care.